like a little country. They were declaring Chaz or Chop or whatever. But the thing of it is, the mayor was fine with that until they
came to her house.
Until they came to her house. And then all of a sudden the light switch went on and they were like, we're shutting that down.
So you can see the hypocrisy there. Those two words, autonomous zone, that tells the tale right there, because there's no such thing as an autonomous zone in the United States. That is civil insurrection.
Amen.
That
Amen.
is rebellion. The last time it happened was 1861 in South Carolina. They wanted to have an autonomous zone, and it led us to a civil war. You can't have that because there's lawlessness. When you surrender part of a city, they're still receiving city services. The lights are still on. The water's still running. But there's lawlessness and anarchy. And the businesses that were located inside that area has been abandoned. As a career police officer, that to me is just ridiculous.
Sean Hannity's program a couple of nights ago, they had a guy, they started shooting each other in the autonomous zone. One of the guys who happened to be a black man, they killed his son.
19 years old.
19 years old.
Paramedics and the firemen couldn't get to him, and they kept.
They wouldn't let the police in there to help the boy.
And then Mr. Anderson finally found out that it was his son.
So see, the key word is let the police in. There should never be a situation that occurs where the police have to be let in.
Absolutely.
They should have just gone in.
Yeah.
I don't think they had
any
support
what will happen,
from the mayor.
Don't you? If he did that, and people got hurt, then they would blame the police.
Well, they're going to blame the police anyway.
That's true.
So you can't just surrender the city.
That's true.
Well, you can see we're in like a propaganda war to get our idea out to the public, like on this program and others, that there's a conflict going on and we have to work together. We need everybody that believes in law and order to work together to try to save our country and save our city and get a responsible person for mayor.
We need to start with the mayor.
What do you think the people, because they're the ones that you're protecting, the police are protecting,
Mm-hmm.
What do you think the people themselves should be doing for the police? Besides calling the mayor out or metro councilman, it seems like at some point we ought to be back in the police.
Well, correct. If you believe in law and order, you should support the police as long as the police are doing their work correctly. Like what happened out in Minnesota when George Floyd, there's absolutely
we all agree with
no
that,
excuse for that. There's no excuse. There's nothing anybody can say to justify what happened to him. So as long as the police are doing their jobs correctly, or at least trying to do their jobs correctly, we should support them. And in Louisville, these guys are trying their best to do the job right, but they're not getting any support. What the public can do, first and foremost, is stop the chaos. And then the silent majority should support the police by not thinking of the police using these broad strokes. Because if one police officer does something bad somewhere, the public shouldn't generalize that out and say that all police officers. Because that's tantamount to saying, well, this one black male was arrested selling drugs, so all black males are dope dealers. You can't paint with those broad strokes. You have to look at everything on a case-by-case basis. And you have to offer due process. These officers that are involved in this Breonna Taylor matter, as terrible as it is, everybody deserves due process. If they're guilty, the system will find them guilty, and then they'll be dealt with. But when we get into this business of guilty until proven innocent, everybody in jeopardy, because I have to do is say you did something to me.
That's what Marxist thinking is.
Exactly.
There's no due process.
That flies in the face of our system of jurisprudence in this country, and we cannot allow that. Police officers and citizens, everybody needs to get due process. They need to be allowed to defend themselves and not punished until it's been shown that they've done something to be punished for. I think the public really needs to understand that, be aware of that, and I think they do. It's not the silent majority that's causing the issues. It's the people 2%. Who come in from out of town. Mm-hmm. I can't say that they're even protesting. This is just rioting and looting. And they've taken the message over from the actual protesters. They've stolen that message. They've come into town and they've stolen that good message the real protesters were trying to get across, is that we need positive social change. We need police to do their job in a responsible fashion. These rioters came to town and they stole that message from the actual peaceful protesters who are trying to cause positive change. It's a no-win situation. It's bad on every angle. And I don't know why it is still being allowed.
Well, that one lady said that she was trained to be a Soviet. Wasn't that it?
No, she trains, and she was training. She also trains all the people. This was a leader, Therese Cullors, Cullors, Cullors. She's the co-founder of Black Lives Matter. A lot of people get into that movement. They're like a sector of it, and they really want, like what you just said, social change and do what's correct, and they don't want to believe in violence. But the true Black Lives Matters movement, she actually said, we train our people to be Marxists. I saw her many times on TV just saying that. So the actual co-founder of Black Lives Matters is not really the type of a message that the regular protesters, they don't understand how deep their message is, how wrong the actual founders of that movement is. Unfortunately, kind of gone the wrong route.
The Black Lives Matter movement has a great slogan, Black Lives Matter. But then I think they've twisted it and perverted it because it should actually read certain Black Lives Matter.
Yeah, that's what they're at now.
And I'm all about positive social change. But it seems to me that the Black Lives Matter movement and those folks only come around and have a problem in certain instances. I believe there was a retired police captain, black police captain out in St. Louis that was murdered. Where was the outrage from Black Lives Matter then? You've got in Chicago hundreds of young black men and women being shot and killed every day. Where's the Black Lives Matter outrage then? Their slogan should be certain Black Lives Matter.
It's really good.
It's
true.
It's hard for me to really take them seriously when they are being as hypocritical as they are. If you're going to do it right. If your slogan is Black Lives Matter, then all Black Lives matter, not just pick and choose who we say matters.
Well, that just reminds me, said that about the all Black Lives Matter. This girl, I think Harvard. She's a Harvard intern, and I just saw this on news last night on Ingram, I think. She was saying if anybody says
or all lives matter.
All lives matter. Yeah. She said I will either cut your throat or cut you and watch you bleed out because someone was going to say all lives matter. This is an intern at Harvard, and she was Asian descent, I believe it was.
She immediately lost her job too.
Well, praise the Lord.
She did lose her job.
Is the internship there? Awesome.
So that's what I read.
I haven't heard that yet.
What if a Republican?
Oh, they'd probably in jail.
The abortion clinics are killing black babies all the time, and they don't care about that
It's
either.
right in the thick of the woods where they live.
So many hypocritical things are happening in government, in the media, in the forefront of our lives, and we just ignore it or accept it. That's not going to work anymore. I believe that we've reached a tipping point.
I do too.
In this country.
That's exactly it.
And whether we tip over or not is going to be decided here. And this is an incredibly important year. And it's kind of suspicious, and people are going to say I'm a conspiracy theorist for this, but it's a little bit suspicious to me that all these things, the pandemic and the rioting and all this stuff happens in an election year.
It's not
coincidental.
It's not coincidence.
I don't think
after a while, you begin to just see this pattern, and it just happens one thing right after another. I think there's a time and a place to be not just suspicious, but to actually say the odds of all this happening are just, it's just too much.
I was heard on the way into work, and they said that it's interesting. Some cities are going to actually make a requirement to wear a mask, a law. And even Biden said he would make it a law too. They don't want this to stop with the pandemic. They want to continue it. It's interesting that they'll do that. They'll cite you for not wearing a mask, but then all of a sudden you can go down certain cities and see rows and rows of heroin. They're going to allow that lawlessness and people to do that to themselves, but they want to actually fine. I think the fine was $1,200 or something. It was in some city in California that's already trying to do that now, and I'm like, that's...
So what's happened to personal freedom?
Responsibility of taking care of yourself. And we talk about good is bad, and in the end times, the Bible, evil will look that what they're doing is good, and that they will look upon us as evil. And it's so true. It's actually right before us.
I was talking with a lady today, and she says, well, I don't know what to do. I said, well, if you can get on Facebook and make your own Facebook page and tell people that we think we need to turn back to God, that would be a big
step
in the right direction. It would be a good start. And she said, well, I can do that. So maybe there are people watching the program today that can do that too.
step until you get more
Well,
involved.
that's exactly right. And everybody is important. Everyone's important.
That's another misnomer. We're not all children of God. In the Bible, we're only become children of God when we're adopted in His family, when we accepted Jesus Christ, but we're all His creation. So He created us. He loves all of us. He wants all of us to come to Him. People get that messed up too, I believe. They don't understand there is a good and a bad. There is a moral compass that needs to come from God.
And there's a tremendous cultural war going on. There are people that, like you remember, we were talking about that gentleman King that wanted to get rid of all the Christian
Sean King.
stained
All the
glass windows
all the Jesus statues.
But stained glass.
and stained glass.
Only the white ones, though.
Anybody with any sanity knows anything probably understand that Jesus appeared like all the other Palestinian or Jewish people at that time.
Olive color skin,
He
probably.
didn't appear as a red man or a Chinese person or whatever in that society.
His race was of Middle Eastern descent.
Yeah, he had to look something similar to everybody else. Depict him different ways, but nevertheless.
Well, that's to relate to him. Larry Elder said that, I believe. He said, you go to a black community, a black church, you'll have a picture of Jesus, a black, Asian, white, and so forth. He said that's so we can relate to him.
And try to speak out for Bible and what God says and Christianity.
Somebody made a really good point today, and I heard this on their talk radio. It was on Mike Gallagher, I think it was, and he said, or somebody said that 2% of people who want to bring down our America and they want to bring it to a Marxist state, they really are. Think about it. How many people, he said, out there are not saying anything in their job? This is especially for teachers, because I've heard many teachers that I know, and they'll say, no, I can't. They won't not teach that because they're afraid they'll lose a job. He says, how important is your job, or how important is your freedom? And he says, do you go in a workplace and you're a closet conservative? They really are kind of dictating that we can't speak up.
Well, I am a college professor. I'm not a closet conservative.
Amen for you, brother.
I'm sure sooner or later it's going to bring me into conflict with the school, but
we're on your side.
Pray a hedge of protection around you.
But I have the First Amendment right to speak. Everybody else does. Which brings me to what the point you brought up about the statues. I don't understand that, because what that's saying is if I have a problem with the statue, it has to come down, even though all these other people like it and they get something from it. Because I don't like it, they can't have it. Go by that same line of thinking. How long is it going to be before somebody says, statue of Martin Luther King, it's got to come down because it offends me? It's just madness.
It's madness.
The statues aren't doing anything. They're not hurting anybody. It's not like you have a statue of Hitler. There's statues that mean something to certain people.
There is one is it Washington? I think we saw it, or maybe we had talked about it. It was actually a picture of Beelzebub or whatever. It was the devil, and they haven't touched that one.
The statue?
In the area where they're rioting. And also, Robert Byrd, the one that was in the KKK, his is still there. Pelosi and Clinton, Obama both gave him eulogies when he just died recently, and he was a horrible racist person. He was known for it. You know who he is, Robert Byrd?
He's a senator.
They have a statue of him. I think West Virginia is where he's from, or was from, and they haven't touched that. They'll get rid of
Abraham Lincoln.
Yeah, and face that one. I said, if you're going to get rid of anything, he needs to come down first.
I don't understand why they would attack the statue of Abraham Lincoln, the first Republican president.
I don't
but he was the
understand
president that signed the Emancipation Proclamation.
Exactly.
It just doesn't make sense.
Well, they went after Gandhi. They went after Gandhi. He's known for peaceful protest.
Well, that tells you loud and clear what their agenda is.
Yeah.
It's
not protest to cause positive social change. If you're attacking Abraham Lincoln and Gandhi, but you leave a statue of the devil up,
that doesn't make sense.
I really believe.
Thank you very much, Lieutenant Pearson and John Brewer and Cindy Marlow.
And Dr. Simon.
Hi, this is Frank Simon here with the rest of the news. We have Corbin Seavers, John Brewer, and we also have a special call-in guest from, Washington?
Let me introduce him. This is Mr. Rafael Mangual, the Fellow and Deputy Director of Legal Policy at the Manhattan Institute. He's published in a lot of prominent newspapers, the Wall Street Journal, the Washington Post, and the New York Post. Most recently published a pretty controversial article called "The Toxic Narrative About Police is Wrong." And we wanted to talk to him about that article, get his perspective on what's happening. Because here in Louisville, we're having a lot of controversy about Louisville Metro Police Department. They're trying to sort of put off the narrative that these people just systemically trying to kill black folk and harass black folk, etc. So let's start off by talking about your article, sir. Where was that published?
This was published in City Journal, which is a public policy magazine published by the Manhattan Institute. I'm contributing editor there as well. One of these publications I kind of grew up reading, specifically because of all the great work that its writers had done on the issue of policing. And so what I really wanted to do with this piece was kind of contextualize police violence for a lot of people, because in the wake of the Floyd killing, which was indefensible, I think everyone who watched that video agrees that what we saw was an abuse of power. I've not seen any prominent sort of policing world figures to defend the behavior of Officer Chauvin. But what's happened is people have kind of latched onto that video to argue that there is this sort of systemic, deep-seated violence problem within policing as an institution. And what I wanted to do with this article was explain why that's not true. And I think the first main point that's important to make there, that you have to properly contextualize the numbers in light of the overall volume of police activity and in light of the overall number of police officers that operate within the United States. We have more than 680 some odd thousand uniformed full-time police officers operating in the United States. They make about 10.3 million arrests a year. They have more than 70 million other kinds of public contact, so pulling people over, investigative stops, that kind of thing. And so when you look at, say, the rate of fatal police use of force, which you see is that deadly force is only a factor in 0.003% of all arrests.
Could you repeat that number?
It's 0.003% of all arrests.
Is that about 1 out of 10,000?
Just about. And that's just arrests. Arrests in which police officers are using their service weapons. And of course, in the vast majority of those cases, the people against whom they are using those weapons are usually armed, dangerous, and actively resisting.
So how is it, though, being an average person, you're watching television, you're reading the articles, you're seeing these massive demonstrations, and you just get the impression, oh my Lord, there's this massive amount of violence that's disproportionately distributed out to black citizens, and that violence is coming from the police department, police officers. How is it they've been so successful in sort of pulling off, painting that narrative without the evidence supporting it?
Well, I think they've been successful because we live in the technology age, which means that basically every citizen is a journalist, which is to say that the proliferation of smartphones almost guarantees that on a regular basis you are going to be able to capture some instance of police conduct that at least on video will look bad and that can be sort of twisted to support a narrative. And of course the media plays a role in sort of amplifying these instances as if they represent the center of the distribution of police behavior, but they don't. They represent the tail. I just think it's a combination of them being so good at telling these stories and being able to find pieces of video evidence that would, at least on their face, seem to support that narrative, and then blowing that up. And I think that's kind of how we've got to the place that we're at now. And so what I try to do with my work is just really beat the data to force people to reckon with the fact that these arguments don't have a very strong leg to stand on. Yes, it's true that if you're using the proportion of the population that black citizens constitute, that you can make the argument that they are disproportionately represented among targets of police use of force. But of course, that's the wrong denominator. What we should be looking at are things like violent crime rates. And we know that there are vast racial disparities in the violent crime statistics. Black American is about 6 times more likely than a white American to be the victim of a homicide. A black American is about 8 times more likely than a white American to commit a homicide. This is going to inform not only how police deal with those citizens, which isn't exactly what you want because it can lead to false positives, and I think we've seen that, but it's also going to inform how police deploy their resources. And if you are I think a reasonable person, you can agree with the idea that police should be deploying their resources to the areas that need them most, which is to say the areas with the most serious violent crime problems. And if those areas are disproportionately Black and brown Americans, then of course there's going to be a higher likelihood in the data that police are going to have these kind of fraud interactions with people in those demographic backgrounds.
But you're saying that your evidence is not showing that there is a bias, a racist intent on the police. This is evidence of systemic racism. Is that what you're arguing with some of your statistics?
That's exactly what I'm arguing. One of the ways I think people make this systemic racism argument is they conflate disparities with racism. A racial disparity is not prima facie evidence that racism is afoot. People will, for example, point to the fact that Black men are twice as likely in terms of their odds of being killed by police as white men. So the odds of a Black man dying in the hands of police are 1 in 1,000. The odds of a white man, or for men generally, are 1 in 2,000. But the odds of a woman dying in police hands is 1 in 33,000. I don't think that anyone would point to that disparity and say that police are sort of misinterests. And so that's one flaw, I think, in the sort of systemic racism argument. The other flaw is, as we pointed out, it kind of eschews intent as something that they feel necessary to prove. You'll often hear the argument that you can have a racist system without any racists. I kind of reject that definition. I think intent is at the heart of any charge of racism. Most importantly, the systemic racism argument ignores one of the most important racial disparities that we've seen with respect to outputs of the criminal justice system. They always focus on enforcement, but they ignore the benefits of our criminal justice system. And those benefits come in the form of crime declines. If you look at the crime decline that began in 1990, has taken us to today in American cities across the country, that decline has inured primarily to the benefit of Black and brown Americans. And that disproportionality has to also be incorporated into this debate, how we understand the claim of systemic racism. And I think when you see the system operated pursuant to its stated goals, and that in achieving those goals benefits Black Americans to such a disproportionate degree, I find it strange credulity to argue that the system is systemically racist.
Now, not to change the subject too much, but have you ever done any research on the number of fallen police officers that have been killed in the line of duty?
I haven't, for myself, done any sort of systemic work on that. I'm aware of the sort of general data trends. I think about 20-some-odd police officers are killed by felonious assault in the line of duty every year. Of course, many more die on duty, whether it's car accidents or things of that sort. It is a statistically dangerous occupation. One of the things that I've been writing about, actually, is how the sort of left's criminal justice policies, this pursuit of decarceration, criminal justice reform for its own sake, has not only made the streets more dangerous for citizens, they've made the streets more dangerous for police officers. Mm-hmm. And when you see police officers who are killed in the line of duty and the suspect is caught, almost always that suspect either has an active criminal justice status, which is to say they're on parole, probation, or bail, and they often have a pretty extensive criminal history. And as we increase the risk profile in policing, not just with respect to the physical danger, but also now the legal pressures, I fear that a lot fewer people are going to be willing to do that job.
I asked for a personal reason. I have a dear friend of mine. He's just retired from the police department. His brother was a police officer. I do a chess education program. I had a police officer who's one of my coaches. The stories they would share with me, my friend, he wasn't in the police officer but a few months. He literally was almost killed because a guy would not show his hands when he kept demanding it. And he didn't know if the guy had a gun or not. Fortunately, his partner came behind the suspect and said, "Put your hands up." And then he threw his hands up. Sir, that man was reaching for a cigarette lighter. And my friend just lost it. He said, "Man, I almost killed you over a cigarette lighter." And the guy said, "It's brand new." It's a dangerous occupation. So I've done a lot of things, but I've never had to make a decision. Life and death split-second decision. Do I shoot or do I not shoot?
This is a real problem that officers face in the field, and it's one that I think the average citizen doesn't truly understand. My father was an NYPD detective for 20 years, and we had two close family friends, ex-partners of his, who were killed in the line of duty in 2004 by a man who was actually unarmed. He was able to disarm one of my dad's best friends and murder him in cold blood, and then win a shootout with his partner. And so even when a gun is not clearly involved, there are real dangers that police officers face, and it's one of these jobs where they understand that the reality is that if they let their guard down, that could be the last time that they do that. And so, especially in high crime areas, I think you do see a lot of officers on edge. I think they are kind of incorporating some of what they see reflected in the data into how they approach the people with whom they deal. And sometimes that can make for really tense interactions. Those interactions don't feel good to be on the other side of. But what people need to understand is that it's not racial animus that's motivating. It's a desire to go back home to their families.
Yes.
I think that we all have to do more to try and appreciate the fact that these men and women in uniform are putting themselves on the line voluntarily in service to their community, and that's noble pursuit.
You said your father was a police officer. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Yes, your father's a police officer. Just an average Joe, as you said, putting his life on the line. And I don't know, I doubt very seriously if he was making six figures for that, was he?
Not even close.
Not even close.
We grew up very humbly.
So our time's about up. Let me just say this real quick. One, thank you for coming on. We appreciate it. We hope we'll be able to schedule again. And I also want to thank Dr. Simon for making this possible. Sir, he's one of our most respected citizens here in the city of Louisville. We just can't do the great work that we're doing right now if it wasn't for Dr. Simon. Dr. Simon, go ahead and say something.
I appreciate the comments, and I just wanted to try to bring it home just a little bit. Corbin and our other guest over here, John Brewer, went downtown in Louisville, where we live, and took footage of how the city in general is boarded up. And the churches, at least some of the windows, are boarded up also. And we have a mayor who said, oh, well, he told the police to step back, and to just sort of let mayhem continue, as I would say. I just wonder if you have any thoughts about that.
This is something that is unfortunately not unique to Louisville. I think that we are in the midst, in many cities around the country, sort of seeing what the fallout from that kind of posture is going to be. As police are told to back off, as it's signaled to police that they don't have the support of the political infrastructure of the jurisdictions in which they work, what they're going to do is lay off of the proactive type of enforcement that we know not only that citizens want, but that we know is associated with lower rates of crime. And as cities like New York, Chicago, and Louisville, and St. Louis experience crime surges, I think we have to really ask ourselves whether we're taking the right approach here.